Hey there, advanced math. And today it's going to be really advanced math. Welcome back. So we're going to multiply two negative numbers today. One of the most, it's not hard to remember, but to truly understand, probably one of the hardest things we will do this year. So go ahead and write this as the title of the next page in your math notebook. And when you are all set, close it up and follow along with me. So we have been multiplying, and I think I made one of these the other day. That's not very good. We've been talking about multiplying positive numbers and negative numbers. And we talked about multiplying a positive times a positive, which you have known how to do forever and ever and ever. And that is going to be a positive number. So like 10 times 32. Those are both positive. So my answer would be positive. And 6 times 9, those are both positive, so my answer would be positive. And then we talked in our last lesson about multiplying a positive number by a negative number, so either here or here on my chart, and that was a negative number. So like 5 times negative 3, we talked about that being negative because that's like negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3 plus negative 3. And if I add all those up, that would be negative 15. Negative 15. And so similarly, 10 times, or it's not 10 times negative 22, kind of the number would be 220. And because it's one positive times one negative, it would be negative. And same thing here. We learned in the last lesson as well. It didn't really matter if we reverse the signs. That's still negative 7 plus negative 7 because of the commutative property. So that's still going to be a negative. One negative times one positive. Or one negative times one positive. And so this is what we're left with. What happens when I multiply a negative number times a negative number? And what I'm going to do, so this is one of those things I would bet you most even high school and seniors in college and stuff who study math could tell you that a negative times a negative number is a positive number, and it is. But they couldn't tell you why. So the first thing I want to do is just let you know that that's it. A negative number times a negative number is a positive number, which seems crazy. Negative 3 times negative 4, negative times a negative is positive 12. And negative 10 times negative 13 is positive 130, which doesn't seem right, but it is. So the first thing I want to let you know on the I do is that a negative number times a negative number is a positive product. So for instance, I just did a few examples, right? So negative 7 times negative 6 is 6 times 7 is 42, and negative times negative is positive 42. Hardly seems right. Holds up with fractions too. Negative 3/5 times negative 1/2. They're both negative, so my answer is going to be positive. I have a negative number times a negative number. Gives me a positive product. And I can just use my fraction algorithm to do that. 3 times 1 is 3. 5 times 2 is 10. And so negative 3/5 times negative 1/2 is positive 3/10. Really is. Decimals too, same deal. 2 and 4/10 times, times what? Negative 6 and 25/100 is, get my calculator for that. It's going to be a positive number because I'm doing a negative times a negative. And it's that. Oh, look at that. pick the number on the nose, positive 15, just is. Division works the same way. Negative 100 divided by negative 5 is negative, divided by negative is positive. I'm just harping on it because most people just memorize this and they don't understand it. So I'm going to start by letting you just know that that's the way it works. Okay? Let's see, negative 3/4 divided by negative 2/3. So negative divided by a negative is going to be a positive answer. And then I just use my algorithms to find the number. That's going to be 3/4 times the reciprocal is positive 9/8 is the answer. So negative divided by a negative gives you a positive. Negative divided by negative is a positive. I'm going to show you why. In the I do, you don't have to know why. I'm going to show you this. This is not like you need to be able to redo this proof, but I just think that it helps to understand that somebody didn't just make this up as the rule, that this really came from other math, and it just has to be this way if we follow what naturally happens in math. So think along with me. This is purely like a brainy exercise. But I'm going to show you why it has to be. Before I tell you to just memorize it, I figure, hey, it's worth knowing, right? So here we go. So let's say I want to prove to you that negative 2 times negative 5 has to be positive 10. Okay? So here goes. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something weird first. Keep this in mind. And I'm going to multiply, I'm going to do a weird thing. I'm going to show you, I'm going to do negative 2 times 5 plus negative 5. So when I look at that, before I do any fancy math on it, you know this has to be 0. Because 5 plus negative 5 is 0, and negative 2 times 0 is going to be 0. Right, so I'm making a problem for you that I know and you know has to be 0 because it's 2 times 0. Okay, and so now I'm going to use the distributive property here. And this is weird because I'm doing math within something I already know the answer to. So I'm going to use the distributive property because I've got a product of a sum. And so that tells me that negative 2 times 5 plus negative 2 times negative 5 would still equal 0. I didn't change anything. I took this and I used the distributive property. So if 2 times 0 has to be 0, all this still also has to be 0 too. If I do negative 2 times 5, and I do negative 2 times negative 5, that has to equal 0. Right? So this we know how to do. We know negative 2 times 5 from the last lesson is negative 2 plus negative 2 plus negative 2 plus negative 2 plus negative 2. I can use good old repeated addition. And we already know that that is negative 10. This is too hard to show. I can't show you negative 2 groups of negative 5. I can't do that. I don't know what that even means or what that would look like. So this one, I can't solve this with any old math I have. I have to just prove this to you another way. So what happens here, notice I've got negative 10 plus whatever this is has to be 0. And if you look at it, what does this have to be? In order for this all to hold up, this has to be positive 10 because the only thing I can add to negative 10 and get 0 is positive 10. So that means negative 2 times negative 5 has to be positive 10 because I'm just basing it on a whole bunch of other math. If you already know that 2 times 0 is 0, which you do, and then you just rearrange this 0, this still has to be equal 0. And if this is negative 10, this, in order for this to be 0, this, weird as it is, this has to be a positive number. Blows your mind, but in order for math to hold up, a negative times a negative just has to be a positive number. I can't show it to you. I had to prove it to you. So this is in math what we call a proof, which you rarely see when you're in 5th grade, I'm going to admit. But since I can't show you negative 2 groups, I have to show you another way why it works, and that's it. You do not have to memorize this. You do not even have to totally understand this. I just want you to know this comes from somewhere, and you're not just taking my word for it that a negative times a negative is a positive. Nobody made it up. It's what has to be true because of the rest of the math. Okay? All right, let's hustle here. So we do. So the first big thing I want you to do in your we do, open your notebook back up, is have your chart here. And when you multiply, you can find your old chart if you don't want to do one, or divide. A positive times a positive, or a positive divided by a positive, is positive. A positive times a negative, or a positive divided by a negative, is a negative. A positive times a negative, same thing, or positive divided by negative is still negative. And the negative divided by negative is a positive number. That's the weird one. A negative times a negative is a positive, or a negative divided by a negative is a positive, because it has to be. I showed you all that math, and it just has to be that way. I proved it. I couldn't show it, but I proved it. So let's do some examples real quick. So if you just want to start with basic numbers like negative 10 times negative 25, negative times a negative is going to be a positive, and then I can just multiply the numbers to get the value. Works with fractions, negative 1/2 times negative 6/5. I'm just making one up. Negative times a negative is going to be a positive number, and I can use my fraction multiplication algorithm after. I don't have to deal with my signs anymore. 1 times 6 is 6. 2 times 5 is 10. Works with decimals. Negative 2 3/10 times negative 3 151 1/1000 is going to be a positive number. And I'm just going to use my calculator to find that positive number. It is that. 7 and 2,473 10,000ths. Works with division 2. Negative 20 divided by negative 4 is positive 5. Can't show it to you. Can't make negative 4 groups. That doesn't make any sense. But I proved to you why a second ago. Works with fractions. Negative 2/3 divided by negative 3/5 is a positive number. And then I can just use my division algorithm to get the number. 2/3 times 5/3 is 10/9. All right, and that's how it works. So multiplication and division is really a memorization game, frankly. I mean, you just know if one of the numbers is negative and one's positive, the answer is negative. If both numbers are negative, the answer is positive. It's really not that hard to deal with multiplication and division. I think out of all the operations, subtraction is the hardest. You just have to remember how the signs work in multiplication and division. It's hard to, a lot's pretty tough to figure out. But that's how it works, guys. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed my proof, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.